The sterile air of the hospital reeked of antiseptic and fear as Hope paced just outside the emergency room, her face a pale canvas of dread and helplessness. Her hands trembled, clutching Beth's favorite stuffed bunny, now streaked with the sweat of her panic. The doors burst open and Liam arrived, breathless, eyes wild with worry, searching until they landed on Hope, and in that moment he knew something was deeply wrong. Her eyes met his, filled with 1,000 questions and no answers, and before he could brace himself, she collapsed into his arms, her body stiff with fear as her voice cracked with desperation. She told him the nightmare had begun with a phone call from Beth's teacher, who reported that their daughter had collapsed in the middle of class. For the past few days, Beth had experienced recurring nosebleeds, but Hope, blinded by denial and clinging to optimism, had brushed it off as a common childhood ailment. Now that small oversight had snowballed into something far more dangerous. The doctors had managed to stabilize Beth barely. Machines beeped, monitors flashed, and nurses buzzed around her small form like bees swarming a dying flower. After what felt like an eternity, the emergency room doctor emerged with grave eyes and heavy words. The diagnosis hit harder than either of them could have anticipated: leukemia. Specifically, an aggressive form of childhood leukemia that required immediate treatment and, most crucially, a bone marrow transplant. Without a matching donor, Beth's chances of survival dwindled rapidly. Hope could hardly breathe. The words slammed into her chest like a freight train, stealing all sense of logic or time. She clutched Liam's arm, trying to find some anchor in this sea of despair. Without hesitation, she volunteered herself as the donor. She would give anything, everything for her daughter. But before her resolution could solidify, Liam interjected. He told her she needed to stay strong for Beth, to be there in the weeks and months of chemotherapy and recovery that lay ahead. He would be the one to donate. He insisted. Hope, still in shock, allowed herself to be persuaded by his calm demeanor, not knowing that behind his controlled exterior lay a far more devastating secret. Liam was dying. Diagnosed weeks prior with a terminal brain tumor that had advanced too far for surgical intervention, he had concealed the truth from everyone. Doctors warned him that even minimal physical stress could push his body past the point of no return. Undergoing anesthesia, enduring the invasive marrow extraction, it was a guaranteed death sentence. But Liam had already accepted his fate. The tumor was inoperable, and even with experimental treatment, his chances were bleak. He had days, perhaps weeks, left, and in his mind, there was no better use of his final moments than to save the life of his daughter. Unwilling to shatter hope with this revelation, Liam turned to Steffi, the only other person who knew of his condition. When Steffi confronted him, shocked and devastated by his plan, she pleaded with him to reconsider. She reminded him that Beth needed a father, that Hope had already endured so much pain, and that there had to be another way. But Liam was resolute. He had made peace with his death, had come to terms with the tumor silently eating away at his brain. His life, as he saw it, was no longer his to protect. It belonged to Beth. He begged Steffi to keep the secret, to let him go through with the transplant without alerting Hope, because if Hope knew, she would never allow it. Steffi was torn between loyalty to Liam and the unbearable burden of secrecy. Every fiber of her being screamed to tell Hope the truth, to stop Liam from walking into a surgical room that could be his grave. But Liam's eyes held a pleading conviction that silenced her. He wasn't just asking her to lie, he was asking her to safeguard Beth's life. The weight of that trust crushed her, but she agreed. As the transplant day approached, Hope remained unaware, focused solely on her daughter. She sat by Beth's bedside, reading stories, braiding her hair and whispering lullabies while nurses adjusted 4 lines and blood counts fluctuated by the hour. Liam prepared in silence, only pausing to watch Hope when she wasn't looking. He memorized every gesture, every soft word, every tired smile she forced for Beth's sake. When it came time to say goodbye, he told Hope it would be fine, that he'd see them soon, and kissed Beth on the forehead with a tenderness that held a lifetime of goodbyes. Inside the surgical room, as Beth was prepped for her transplant and Liam for his extraction, a war raged within Steffi. The guilt gnawed at her like a parasite, clawing its way up until she could no longer breathe under the weight of it. She made the decision to come clean. She ran through the hospital, frantically searching for Hope, determined to tell her everything before it was too late. But when she reached the waiting room, the doors to the operating theaters were already closed and the surgeries were underway. Her confession died in her throat. The hours crawled by in agonizing silence. Eventually, a team of doctors emerged, informing Hope that the transplant had been successful. Beth had responded remarkably well the graft had taken, and while she still had a long road ahead, she now had a fighting chance. Hope wept in relief, clutching Steffi's hand, thanking her for standing by her and Liam. But Steffi couldn't speak. Her mouth opened and closed, her lungs squeezed by dread. Then a second doctor appeared. His face was not one of celebration. Hope's relief was obliterated when she heard the words that followed. Complications, blood pressure drop, seizure, cardiac arrest. They tried everything, but Liam's body could not endure the trauma. He was gone, declared dead shortly after the procedure. The hallway tilted. Hope's scream echoed through the sterile corridors, raw and guttural, a sound no one ever wants to hear come from a mother and a widow in the same breath. She collapsed, unable to process how her world had flipped so violently. Steffi knelt beside her, tears pouring silently down her cheeks, finally confessing everything. Hope listened in stunned horror as she learned of Liam's tumor, his sacrifice, the secret they both kept from her in the name of love. It was too much. Her body shook with grief, betrayal, guilt, and rage, all of it crashing into her with unbearable force. The funeral was held a week later. A simple service, as Liam had wanted, with Beth still too weak to attend, but aware that her daddy had gone to help the stars shine brighter. Hope stood by the casket, numb, holding her daughter's hand as if letting go would unravel what little remained of her sanity. She placed a drawing Beth had made into the casket of their family, smiling, standing under a rainbow, and whispered a final thank you to the man who gave everything to protect their child. Life after Liam's death became a ghost of what it once was. Hope moved through her days on autopilot, trying to be the mother Beth needed while silently mourning the love she lost. Every time Beth laughed, Hope heard Liam's echo. Every time Beth struggled with treatment, she found strength only because Liam had shown her what it meant to give everything for someone you love. The weight of knowing that her oversight ignoring the nosebleeds had led to all of it haunted her at night. But eventually, she began to turn that guilt into resolve. She would raise Beth with every ounce of love she had left. She would carry Liam's memory not as a wound, but as a legacy. Steffi returned to her family, but she was never quite the same. She often found herself staring off into the distance, remembering Liam's final words, his unshakable resolve, and the quiet dignity with which he accepted death. Her relationship with Hope shifted subtly, bonded now by tragedy and the man they both loved. And Beth? She grew stronger. Her body healed with the help of Liam's marrow, and as she grew older, she came to understand what her father had done. She often asked about him, and Hope never hid the truth. She told Beth about Liam's courage, his humor, his heart. She made sure Beth knew every detail because Liam hadn't just given her life. He had shown them all what it meant to love without limits. In the end, Liam's death wasn't just a loss. It was a testament. A brutal, beautiful testament to the enduring power of love, the kind that doesn't flinch in the face of death. The kind that chooses sacrifice. The kind that lives on. Hope's world collapsed the moment the doctors informed her that Liam had died shortly after the bone marrow transplant. The reality hit her like a wrecking ball. Liam was gone. Not from an accident, not from the brain tumor she never even knew existed, but because he had chosen to give his life so that Beth could live. The very same man who had stood beside her through endless storms, who had promised they would get through anything together, was now just a memory, silent, irreversible, eternal. And the cruelest truth of all was that he hadn't needed to die. That truth, when it finally came to light, would torment Hope for the rest of her life. It was only days after the funeral when the full picture began to emerge. At first, she was too numb, too shattered to do anything but survive hour by hour, brushing Beth's hair with trembling hands and forcing herself to eat in front of their daughter just to maintain the illusion of stability. But then came Steffi's breakdown, an emotional avalanche that revealed what Liam had hidden from everyone except her. The terminal brain tumor, the calculated risk of undergoing anesthesia for the bone marrow donation, and his certainty that he would not survive. Liam had made Steffi promise not to tell Hope, knowing that if she had known, she never would have allowed him to go through with the transplant. But Steffi, unable to carry the weight of that secret any longer, finally confessed. She admitted that Hope had been Liam's second choice. He'd only insisted on being the donor because he didn't want Hope to weaken herself during Beth's long recovery. Hope listened in stunned silence, her knees giving way as the realization sank in. If she had been the one to donate, she would have survived. She would still be there, with Beth healing beside her, and Liam still alive. She had taken his place without knowing, and it cost him his life. That knowledge clawed at her, devoured her, made sleep impossible and daylight unbearable. Hope began replaying every detail in her mind, how she had accepted Liam's reasoning too quickly, how she hadn't demanded more answers, how she had let her relief cloud her judgment when he offered to be the donor. It wasn't just guilt. It was a festering, gnawing regret that ate away at her every time she saw Beth smile. Because behind that innocent smile was the sacrifice of a father who would never see her grow up, never walk her down the aisle, never hold her hand through heartbreaks or witness her triumphs. Hope's heart shattered a little more every time Beth asked when her daddy was coming home. Steffi, too, unraveled in the aftermath. She had thought she was doing the right thing, respecting Liam's wishes, preserving his final act of courage, but once he was gone, all she could see was the irreversible outcome. She began lashing out, unable to process the pain in silence. Her anger found a target in Hope. In whispered accusations and grief-fueled arguments, Steffi blamed her for trusting Liam's offer too easily, for not questioning more, for not demanding to be the donor herself. Her words weren't rational, but grief rarely is. She blamed Hope because blaming Liam was impossible. He had become a martyr in death, untouchable in his heroism, even if the choice he made was wrapped in secrets and lies. Hope, for her part, didn't fight back. How could she? Deep down, part of her agreed with Steffi. Her failure to question, her blind trust, had cost her the man she loved. It had cost Beth her father. There were moments she sat on the edge of her bed, staring into nothingness, wondering if she even deserved to be forgiven. But then she would hear Beth stir in the next room, her soft breathing anchoring Hope back to reality. She remembered Liam's final words, his last embrace, and the unwavering love in his eyes when he told her everything would be okay. He hadn't done this out of martyrdom. He had done it out of love. And now, her only option was to honor that sacrifice, not drown in regret. Hope began attending grief counseling in secret. She couldn't fall apart in front of Beth, not yet. She read everything she could about pediatric leukemia recovery, spoke with every specialist available, determined to ensure Beth had the best possible life, one that would be worthy of Liam's ultimate gift. She also made an effort to forgive Steffi. Though the tension between them would never truly disappear, Hope recognized that they were both grieving in their own way, and they were both mothers trying to hold their families together with trembling hands and broken hearts. In another corner of the hospital, Finn struggled with his own demons. As a doctor, he had been following an emerging experimental protocol designed specifically for treating aggressive brain tumors like Liam's. The early results had been promising, too early to test, too fragile to guarantee, but promising nonetheless. And now, Liam was gone. Finn felt the weight of every hour he had spent refining that protocol, knowing he had been so close to presenting a viable option. But Liam had never come to him. Finn had no idea the tumor had progressed that far. The betrayal wasn't personal, it was tragic. Liam had died not knowing that Hope may have been just around the corner. Finn couldn't forgive himself for not reaching Liam in time. He spent long nights reviewing Liam's chart, reading every line, every scan, every missed opportunity like a prayer for a man he admired. The guilt drove him harder than ever before, and he quietly vowed that if he couldn't save Liam, then maybe, just maybe, he could save the next father, the next husband, from the same fate. Beth's recovery was slow but steady. Her body responded well to the transplant, and her resilience astounded every doctor on her care team. But the emotional scars ran deeper. As the weeks passed, she began to understand that her father was not coming back. No matter how many bedtime stories Hope told or how many times Ridge or Brooke tried to distract her with gifts and outings, the absence of Liam lingered like a shadow in every room. One day, Beth asked Hope if her father had died because she got sick. Hope's heart broke all over again. She knelt beside her daughter and tried to explain that Liam had saved her life, that he had made a brave choice because he loved her more than anything. But how do you explain sacrifice to a child who just wants their daddy back? Beth cried herself to sleep that night, and Hope stayed awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, praying that one day her daughter would find peace in the truth. As months passed, the family slowly adjusted to a new normal. Hope continued to keep Liam's memory alive in everything she did. She created a scrapbook with Beth, filled with photos of happier times. She encouraged Beth to talk about Liam, to draw pictures of him, to write him letters. It was her way of making sure he stayed present in their lives, even in absence. She also began speaking out about leukemia awareness, becoming a quiet advocate for early detection and childhood cancer research. It gave her purpose. It gave Liam's death meaning. But late at night, when the world was silent, Hope would sit by the window with a cup of tea gone cold, staring into the dark, haunted by the unchangeable truth. If she had just said no, if she had insisted on being the donor, Liam would still be alive. That thought would never leave her. It would live in the space between her breaths, in the pause between Beth's laughter and her own smile. It would be the silent grief that never faded, no matter how many years passed. For Steffi, the aftermath left her introspective and reserved. Her confrontations with Hope grew less frequent as the months wore on, replaced by a quiet sorrow. She often found herself sitting in Kelly's room, watching her daughter sleep, wondering how close she had come to losing everything. She thought of Liam every day, his smile, his stubbornness, his courage, and tried to instill those traits in their daughter. She spoke to Finn more, letting him in more deeply than she had before. Together, They mourned a man who had died far too soon, and slowly, painfully, they began to heal. Finn never stopped working on the treatment. He named the protocol after Liam the Spencer method and submitted it for clinical trials. He worked late into the night, driven by the hope that Liam's death would not be in vain, that the sacrifice made in a moment of love would ripple forward to save countless others. And though he would always carry the regret of being too late, he found comfort in knowing that he could still make a difference. Beth would grow up knowing she was alive because her father had made the greatest sacrifice a parent could ever make. She would carry that legacy with her, shaping her sense of compassion, resilience, and purpose. And hope would be there every step of the way, broken, yes, but unbowed. Because the only way to honor Liam's death was to live a life that mattered, a life filled with the love he left behind. And in that love, even in the depths of her grief, hope would find strength. Because even though Liam's heart stopped beating that day, everything it stood for, love, courage, selflessness, would live on forever in the daughter he saved and the woman who now carried his memory in every breath she took.